Well, it's time for us to put the kibosh on this Disgaea stuff. This is going to be the last episode of our retrospective. And just like with my Zelda reviews, we're going to take a quick look at some of the more interesting merchandise or spin-offs that the series has created. So let's start off with the actual spin-off games. The earliest spin-off game that I can remember recalling for the series was also one of the biggest shockers for me. It was called Disgaea Infinite, and I was really looking forward to it when I first heard the name. But this game is just completely out of left field. It was for the PSP, which at the time, the original Disgaea had not yet been ported, but what surprised everybody right away was that it wasn't a strategy game. It was a visual novel game. Heck, you don't even really play as any of the principal Disgaea characters in it. Instead, you play a nameless Prinny who was accidentally framed for the attempted assassination of Overlord Laharl, and as such you need to clear your name. With the help of a strange sprite, you find a way to go back in time and take control of other people's minds. By doing so, you attempt to uncover who really was plotting to assassinate the Overlord before the Netherworld's longest day comes to an end, and you get stuck in an infinite time loop. Now, I will confess that as much as I profess to be a huge fan of the Disgaea series, I've never played this game, for a couple of reasons. The first of which is, at the time it was released, I didn't have a way to get it onto my PSP, as it was released via a download service. And second, well, I just don't like visual novels. Now, I can certainly understand why some people would enjoy visual novels. I mean, they're basically the computerized version of a choose-your-own-adventure book. But to me, I just never found very much appeal in the genre. And I do understand that some people can have a lot of fun with them, and that some interesting things can be done with them. Heck, this game, for example, does seem to have quite a few interesting ideas behind it, but I just really never saw what the big draw to it was. And to me, Disgaea will always be a strategy game, so while I won't say don't pick this game up, I would say that if you're a hard-time fan of Disgaea, proceed with caution. And so, to demonstrate my utter hypocrisy, let's move on to another spin-off series that isn't strategy either, but far and above is much more relevant to my interests. Nippon Ichi Software has released 2 games starring Prinnies for the PSP. Neither of them are strategy or visual novel games, but are instead side-scrolling action platformers and are hard as balls. The first one, Prinny Can I Really Be the Hero, focuses on the Prinnies attempting to find Etna an ultimate dessert, while the second game, Dawn of Operation Panties, has you trying to discover who's been stealing Etna's underwear. Yeah. Now, given that canonically Etna is underage, that just makes the premise of that game a whole lot creepier. Questionable story choices aside, the games are actually really fun action platformers, and like I said before, extraordinarily hard. The games actually seem to know this, as you start out each game with 1,000 lives, and trust me, you are not really expected to survive too terribly long. In the first game, you even have a time limit of 24 hours, though this is converted into gameplay hours, of course. And with all that aside, they are definitely worth checking out. So pretty much all of the Disgaea games are of very high quality. I talked about some of NIS's other games in my very first episode of this retrospective, and I did mention that most of them were of very high quality. The ones that were at least developed by Nippon Ichi Software themselves. But unfortunately, not everything that this series touches turns to gold. There is one serious blemish on this otherwise wonderful series, and it's 13 episodes long. Now, I will freely admit, when I first heard there was going to be a Disgaea anime, I thought it was going to be awesome, and I went into full fanboy mode, expecting something just as great as the games. Rather foolish, considering that most video game adaptations tend to be rather bad, but at the time I thought that this one had potential. Heck, it was being spearheaded by Nippon Ichi Software themselves, the people who actually made Disgaea. And heck, it was even picked up for distribution in the West by Funimation, one of the best dubbing companies this side of the Pacific. And then things got bad. Nippon Ichi gave this anime a pretty big push, and that's understandable. They wanted it to be successful, and it actually got some really nice, very impressive, over-the-top trailers that really made me think that this was going to be just like the game. Heck, there was even a short endorsement for it that was hidden in Disgaea 2, in the form of an animated cutscene that you can unlock much later in the game. However, anybody who has watched the actual show and then rewatched the trailer knows that everything about the promotional material for this anime was a flat-out lie. Many of the things that were included in the 6-minute teaser trailer were never included in the actual show. The animation was far worse, and to be even worse, a lot of things were completely cut from the anime, despite the fact that they did have 13 episodes to work with. Many characters never show up at all, and many of them had reduced roles. Heck, Gordon and his friends were just reduced down to a less threatening version of Team Rocket. Now, it is possible I may give this anime a full review sometime down the line, but there isn't really a whole lot to say about it. It's just so completely boring. It doesn't do anything to try and link itself with the game, and in fact, if you remove the name Disgaea from it and change the characters around, then you probably wouldn't even be able to tell that it was supposed to be based on the game. In fact, one of the worst parts about this is that the entire series is rendered completely useless because it uses one of the non-canonical endings, and, well, let's just say it's one of the most hated endings in the entire series. Now, I will say in its defense that it is not a terrible show. I just find it extraordinarily frustrating because it is nothing like what Disgaea should be. If you've never played any of the games, then it's worth checking out for curiosity's sake, but any established fans of the games should stay away from the anime, as it will induce extreme nerd rage. But even with that blemish on its record, the Disgaea series has produced quite a few other spin-offs of wonderful quality, and I have a few of them right here. Written by Arashi Shindo, the original Disgaea manga was only 1 volume long, and as such, a lot of the story had to be cut down, and a lot of the serious plot elements removed. If anything, it's more like a gag comic than anything else, as many of the characters' flaws and quirks are played up to the 11th level, and most of it is just played completely for jokes, even the situations that were played completely serious in the game. It's certainly not a bad manga by any stretch, and it's actually quite nice and quite cheap at this point as well, so you're only out a few bucks if you didn't like it. But it does suffer a bit from having to cut down the story so much to fill it into a single manga volume, when there could have been so much more done with it. I will admit, though, I do get a chuckle out of a lot of the added gags that were put into this. However, this was done much better when the second Disgaea manga came around, based off of the second game, Disgaea 2: Cursed Memories. This time written by a group called Hecaton, the second Disgaea manga was actually spread out over several volumes, and this actually allowed them to include a whole lot more from the game, and as such, this is much more faithful to the game it's based on than the first one. While they still add in quite a few gags here and there, they do keep a lot of the emotional core that was in the second game, which is fairly important considering that that game was much more emotional than the first or third. Now, I only have the first 2 volumes here, but I can attest that they are of very high quality, and like I said, they represent the game very well. Now, the first manga wasn't bad, like I said, but it felt more like a fan retelling of the story. What with everything that was cut out, it was sort of a reimagining of the plot rather than a straight port. Here, though, the entire story is kept very faithful to that of the game. Very few cuts were made, and I was actually pretty surprised at all of the dialogue sequences that were so similar to the ones put inside the games. Now, of course, they had to make a few changes. You can't just do a straight port from a strategy game to a manga and expect it to appeal to everybody, but what they did change, it was changed tastefully, and we actually did get quite a few funny lines out of it. So bottom line, I do recommend that you check out at least the Disgaea 2 manga if you haven't played the game already. And that's basically all I have to say on this series. Sure, there are a few other products I could probably go on, but all things considered, I wanted to cover the things that were closest to the original series, and I've done that. So I think this is as good a spot as any to go ahead and end this retrospective. I do hope you all enjoyed watching it, and I do hope that you are planning on purchasing Disgaea 4 when it comes out less than a week after this video is put up. I am so excited for this game's launch, and I know it's going to be fantastic. You know how I know? Well, if you're interested in my, opinion of the game, you can go to my Blistered Thumbs page. I have a link below, and you'll be able to see my written review of the game before anybody else gets theirs out. And so this brings us to the end of the second retrospective that I've done on this show. I hope you all had a good time, and I do hope that you are planning to give this series a look, because it really is a great series that is definitely worth your time. But after doing so much action RPG and strategy RPGs in a row, I think we all need something a bit lighter. Something a little bit more stupid. Who's up for a chop sake flick next time?
That's Disgaea 4! Manifesto Declaration number 3! Disgaea promises to make your manliest fantasy come true! Monsters transform into weapons, and 2 monsters unite to become 1 gigantic monster! And then, the gigantic monster transforms into a weapon! The completion of an ultra-super transforming unification! It's unreal, yet it's totally real! Disgaea stands for manly fancy! That's Disgaea 4! Manifesto Declaration number 4! Disgaea promises to let you develop your own clean and prosperous nation. That's good news to all you aspiring world dominators. Experience what it takes to manage your netherworld empire and prepare your future world domination plan.